Welcome in, everybody. We're here for a special edition Men in Red 97 podcast. I'm John Thornton from Hot Takes. We've got the Men in Red 97 editor in chief, Alex Calabrese, and the managing editor of Men in Red 97, Tim Hotsey, joining us today. We're getting a special edition kind of summer transfer window update out before things really start rolling in MLS. We're just going to talk about what we can expect from the Fire, who may be coming, who may be going, and what kind of impact we'll be expecting from those roster changes. And frankly, if we get any at all, you never know with Georg Heights. So just a couple quick things we want to jump into before we kind of get rolling, some refreshers on the rules and regulations and all the things that happen in MLS here. Transfer window opens on July 18th and closes on Wednesday, August 14th. So that means that any incoming transfers, any players coming to MLS from Europe, from other North or South American leagues, must happen within that window, as must any intra MLS deals, so any trades, things along those lines. Outgoing transfers can happen at any time as long as the window in that country is open. It's the same both ways in that sense. In most of the world, this is the primary window as opposed to the secondary window with MLS's single year schedule, and it'll stay open longer, up to about 90 days. In some countries, you've already seen it open, right? We do have some pending roster rule changes potential there. Tim, I'll kind of loop you in, Alex, if you guys want to give some insight on what some of the reporting has been there, so we can kind of dive into that a little bit.
Sure. So Paul Tenorio in the Athletic had a piece out in April. He really did the legwork on reporting this. Uh, the MLS Board of Governors did vote for roster rule changes to take effect in the middle of the season. They haven't been publicly announced yet, and part of the reason why there's been reporting around this, some of them require approval from the MLS Players Association. That has been a little bit of a back and forth with some of the roster changes that are proposed, and as a result, there have been no public announcements of roster rule changes happening yet. The most recent thing that I have heard is that they think that they're still on. Um, there's nothing official yet. Uh, Earlier today in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Garth Lagerwey, who is the president of Atlanta United and really like the one kind of GM type figure in MLS that talks about these things publicly and kind of openly, um, said that the chances are that the rule changes wouldn't be approved until the Board of Governors meeting, which is happening during the All-Star match weekend on July 24th. So the awkward thing is that then creates a situation where the transfer window opens and you've got one set of rule changes and then potentially a different set of rules happening after the transfer window has already been open for like nearly a week, which is nuts, but welcome to MLS.
Yeah, and I think the expectation is still that you will see those changes happen this summer. I think a lot of teams are preparing as if they are going to take effect, but without them being officially over the line yet, we can't say that they're complete yet. I think if you're signing a designated player, this does impact that because whether you need to sign a young designated player, a cheap designated player that is impacted by one of these rule changes with the under 22 slots, but that's probably going to get over the line at some point.
So just to be clear, one of the roster rule changes right now, teams kind of have a choice. They can have two designated players that make above a certain amount of money, around one and a half, well, 1.6, $1.7 million, and three U22 slots, or they can have three designated players that make more than that and one of those U22 slots. The change would be that every team got all the U22 slots. Uh, there's another couple of changes involving how transfer fees would be transferable into money on the roster. I think those we don't really need to get into that much right now. Um, the one that I think would really impact the Fire more than any other is the addition of a second buyout. Uh, Alex Calabrese reported that the team did use this one buyout when they sent Kasper Shibilko to FC Lugano, the team's Swiss sister club, in the offseason. That means that to move another player on using a buyout, they would need to trigger a second buyout, which doesn't technically exist yet. It's been reported that that's one of the changes under consideration.
And it's also worth noting that this basically means that it's very difficult for the Fire to send more than one player to Lugano in the same season. unless it's a loan. So Justin Reynolds was fine because it was a loan and the Fire were still paying his salary. With Shabilko, they were required to use the buyout because Lugano is a team with the same ownership. So if NYCFC sent a player to Hirona or something, they would technically also need to use a buyout to send that player there on a permanent transfer. So if there's a second
I
buyout, the
bet if
Fire could technically, well,
yeah, I think that if NYCFC started doing it a bunch, or LAFC needed to do it with their sister club now in the Swiss league, or things like that started happening, we may see a change to that rule pretty quick. But
right. But I'm just explaining the rule in principle. The
as it is
Fire
now, as we
would
stand today,
need
yes.
to, like, as with a one buyout right now until the law is in effect, the Fire basically cannot send a player to Lugano on a permanent transfer.
And the other thing is that also means they can't have a buyout for Shaqiri, which is one of the things that we'll be discussing later. They can't just say
Right.
goodbye.
To that end, we saw something kind of similar earlier in the year with Charlotte, sending a designated player on loan to Hellas Verona's, if I remember right, and it was an issue of they needed to cover the salary in the loan for him to come off the book. So even if you're moving a player, Alex, to your point, on loan to a sister club, unless they are covering the payment, you don't free up that roster spot, correct?
And it needs to be like 100%, to my understanding.
Yeah.
So if you send a player on loan to USL, and so Victor Bezerra, Misael Rodriguez, those guys who are on loan right now from the Fire, they still take up roster spots for the Chicago Fire in MLS, even though they can't play in MLS because the USL teams are not paying their full salary.
And that's true even if they're paying a significant chunk of their salary, which I think is the thing that feels kind of unfair here.
And even Justin Reynolds being at Lugano, he still took up a roster spot, even though he took up an international slot on Lugano's roster. So that was a point of contention. But he's back training with the Fire now, so that is in the past.
Oh, love to hear that. Love to hear it. So, kind of to take a slight step back, but to build on what we just talked about, there is kind of this feeling as we look around at the international landscape, like this summer window is the primary window for Europe and most of the major leagues in the world, right? So, I guess we talked about a little bit, kind of pre-recording as we're discussing things going on, and I guess the question is like, are we kind of already behind the eight ball to start, and then now you have this additional week of just kind of dead time between window opens. We got to wait a whole other week at least to get to that board of governors meeting to actually get these changes approved. And how do we see that kind of affecting what I guess we're talking MLS at large at that point, but specifically for these moves the Fire are hoping to make? Alex, I don't know if you have any thoughts, Tim, if one of you guys wants to weigh in, but yeah, just where that puts us in terms of timeline and actually effectively signing players.
I mean, before they can sign a player, they will need to sell a player. The Fire's roster is full. There are no open slots on the roster. Frank Klopas spoke about this in his last press conference. If they want to sign anybody, no matter what circumstance, in the league, academy, overseas, DP, no matter what, they need to sell somebody first. So, and that would
Yeah.
require offers to come in as well. And we'll talk about the specific players in just a moment here, but they haven't, but spoiler alert, they haven't received offers.
So it's absolutely man in, man out for the Fire, and that could either be a loan, but again, the loan would have to cover 100% of the player's salary, prorated for the time that they're gone, right? So if it's a 6-month loan, that's different than an annual loan. But MLS just basically didn't want to see teams hiding losses on the books, essentially by sending players on loan, which is a tactic that is sort of been used in financial engineering in some teams in Europe. MLS wanted to kind of get ahead of that rather than stay behind it. So it does put the team in a bind. Other MLS teams have announced players are incoming. They've announced signings. Now, you can announce a signing whenever you want. You can sign the paperwork whenever you want. The player can't officially start playing for you until the transfer window happens. That's when this thing called a transfer certificate can officially be processed and that kind of stuff. But like San Diego have announced that they're like Chucky Lozano is going to be playing for them next year. Like they've announced him as a signing. They don't start playing until next year. You can announce these things whenever the paperwork is done or whenever you feel like it, but the Fire are really not in a position to do that because then it's like, well, that means somebody is moving on, and we won't necessarily know who it is.
Yeah,
Mhm,
and to that end, we've got, feels like most of what we've heard so far has been about players going out, so we'll kinda move into some of the rumors we've heard swirling around. I mean, top of mind for it feels like most people in the world, I mean, when talking about MLS, right, would be Xherdan Shaqiri, coming off some good performances at the Euros for the Swiss natty. So Alex, I'll toss to you in terms of what we know,
mhm,
what it's looking like. There do seem to be some things moving around, but to your point, maybe nothing concrete.
mhm. Yeah, this has been reported fairly heavily the last couple of weeks, last month or so, not just by myself, but Tom Boker as well, others around the league, that the Fire are looking to move on from Xherdan Shaqiri in the summer transfer window if possible. Now, his contract does expire at the end of the season. If nothing gets done in the summer, he'll be gone in 5 months no matter what. But yes, the Fire are certainly listening to offers for Shaqiri should they come in. They haven't received any offers yet, but there was a report in Greece which appears to be fairly credible. We don't really know because the Fire haven't actually received any calls from Panathinaikos last I heard. But Panathinaikos, the Greek giant, they finished fourth in the Greek Super League last season, are reportedly interested in making him a part of their team, and they would be willing to match his salary because they're willing to make that investment. And that is something certainly very interesting because I think Switzerland, going back to Switzerland for him, almost certainly completely off the books for financial reasons. They couldn't afford him. Garrick Heights actually was asked specifically, could Shaqiri go to Lugano in the future? And he straight up said, pretty much impossible for financial reasons. And like we've discussed before, extensively on the website, I can imagine on the podcast as well. Anybody tuning in, Shaqiri has made clear he wants to go back to Europe. He said before the Euros even began that he can imagine himself going back to Europe in the near future. He said during the Euros, he spoke about how he loves the Turkish league. And of course, there have been these rumors in the last couple days since Switzerland's elimination that Panathinaikos of the Greek Super League is interested. So definitely something to keep an eye on. There are no offers yet. Nothing is done. Nothing's even close to done. Nothing's imminent because the Fire haven't received any offers yet. But
So
it's the number one thing to keep an eye on this window in terms of outgoing transfers.
So just to be clear about like the way the mechanics of this work, when a player signs a new deal with a transfer, they're signing a new deal, right? So it's not like a trade in MLS or in any other league in North America where the other team basically assumes their contract from that point on, and like they pay them the same salary and stuff. Player moves to Europe or South America, wherever, or when a player moves to MLS for the first time, like they're signing a new deal that decides what they're paid. Um, the Fire are not expecting a transfer fee for Shaqiri, based on sources that I've talked to, Alex. I don't know if like that shouldn't really be a shock to anybody. Uh, so they're willing to let him go on a free. Um, the trick is he has to sign, like he has to be willing to sign a deal. The other thing worth saying is a player in the last 6 months of their deal, which includes Shaqiri at this point, they and their agent are allowed to speak to other clubs without their current club's permission. So he and his agent can be speaking to anyone they want. Um, if a club in Greece or Turkey or Switzerland, or I mean, if the Cypriot third division wants to sign Shaqiri, they could be having those discussions with his agent. That doesn't hit the Fire until a certain point. So just because the Fire haven't received an offer doesn't necessarily mean that there haven't been discussions, even serious discussions about it, because the real discussions happening are what are the terms of the new deal for Shaqiri? How long is he going to be in that league for? What is the rate of pay? Whatever he gets is going to be uh, a pay cut, I'd assume. I mean, that Greek rumor about I don't think that would be basically a third of their salary going to Shaqiri if he was signed at his current pay. So I don't think that's credible. I don't know, Alex. Was that your reaction to, or
No, my understanding is that it's possible. It's just that we don't know anything definitively until they reach out to the Fire, and there's nothing I've heard about that team specifically on this end, but it has been reported by actually multiple now outlets in Greece. So something to keep an eye on, I guess. I think
So
looking back to right now, just to be very clear with Shaqiri, is he is not yet back. It's been almost a week since Switzerland were eliminated, and he's not back in Chicago. Now, Frank Lopez said he's getting a little bit of a break. They don't have a timeline for when he's coming back yet. He could come back as soon as next week. Who knows? But at the same time, it is certainly noteworthy that he is not back after almost a week away after they eliminated Switzerland.
and there wasn't a timeline. I think that Klopas said that they would have to figure out whether he'd be available for any of the games coming in the next week, including the matches against FC Cincinnati and Miami. Quote, in the next couple of days. This is when we talked to him on Wednesday, which it's not unusual for players to take a little bit of time back from international tournaments. 2 weeks is a heck of a long time to make it from Germany to
Uh-huh.
Chicago if you're not coming on a
And
boat.
he also didn't play significant minutes in the tournament. He played 71 minutes total. There were 58 minutes in a start against Scotland where he actually scored one of the goals of the tournament, but that was his only minutes in the whole tournament up until the quarterfinal where he made a cameo in the second half of extra time. Scored his penalty, actually hit the post from a corner kick, but it wasn't enough. They were eliminated, though. I will say he did provide a spark in those last couple of minutes of extra time.
I watched him line up for that kick and was like, "Oh, he's going for this, isn't he? Like he's gonna do it. He's really gonna do it."
He scored one for
Yeah,
Chicago. It got marked as
I
an
yeah,
own
I
goal,
know.
but he did score one. So
I don't think I've ever seen him not try to do that.
Shaqiri,
But
Olympicos, the Olympicos may be going to Greece. So, I mean, I feel like this
eh,
is just like a match made in heaven.
something to that effect. He's certainly gotten to it, and
There's
to that
certainly
end,
another
like
Greek club that would be more appropriate, but whatever. We'll move on.
yeah, um, yeah. So to your point, moving on. Kind of another well, still listed as a designated player. Again, somebody who's had a lot of rumors bubbling for it feels like at least the last 12 to 18 months, kind of always on the perpetual chopping block, as it were. Gaston Giménez, we've seen some fairly easily debunked rumors about Boca Junior, and now there are some more rumors coming out of Argentina about potentially Gaston moving back to South America. Tim, Alex, I would love to kind of just jump out and say, like, hey, what do we have here? Is there something concrete? Do we see a realistic timeline of him moving on?
yeah, I mean, earlier this week, there was a lot of noise coming out of Argentina about a possible return to Vélez Sarsfield, which is the club that the Fire signed him from. The reporting basically said that Vélez were interested in signing him on a free transfer, so no transfer fee. They hoped that the Fire would let him go from his contract and that he would join them as a reinforcement for their midfield. Now, the Fire never received an offer for Vélez. Contrary to some of the reporting out of Argentina, I can confirm that the Fire did not receive any communication from Vélez regarding this. So they very well may have been interested, as the reporting from Argentina would suggest, but they never actually made an offer to the Fire. So nothing seems to be concrete, and that seems to have died down a little bit now in the last couple of days. Since ironically that Argentine report came out saying that the Fire said he's not for sale. Um, I don't know. It's a weird situation where it seems that everything is coming out of Argentina, nothing's coming out of Chicago because there's been no noise on this side. It's all been out of the Argentine Vélez local media side.
Yeah, Tim, and I'll toss it over to you in a sec. I do just want to point out, and please correct me if I'm wrong. He has 18 months left on his deal. He's signed through
Mhm.
December of 2025, correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
Now
just
let me.
clarifying.
and
So a free
he
transfer
is
would
he
be a
is a
little
designated
unique for that.
player. He is a designated player, but they can buy him down at any time.
Mhm.
So he's a designated player, but he's under the max TAM threshold, and he can be bought away from the designated player tag if they choose to sign a designated player in his place.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think the question is how long he's under contract for as well. Which he's
It is
signed
end of 2025.
three separate deals with the Fire. It is just the end of 2025. Now, again, uh, the Fire might be looking for a transfer fee with him. I think that they probably think that there's teams in South America that might be willing to pay one. I don't know how much of a stickler they would be about that, to be honest. But I think one real concern is if Shaqiri and Gaston Giménez were to move, they would need to have new signings lined up to replace them in this window and not just like leave those spots open for the rest of the year. And that sort of becomes the challenge. Like that more than anything else, I think over the past couple seasons, we've seen the Fire be pretty slow to move players in, particularly in the summer window when there have been open spots. Like even when the spot has been open for months leading up to the summer transfer window happening, we haven't really seen the Fire be anxious to fill those. And I think that that would be the concern is like, can you swap someone um, in time? Like for the window before the window's closed, which it's only a 30-day window as the secondary window.
And just to put a bow on Gaston, I just wanted to put his quote back out from when I asked him about the transfer rumors because the Argentine rumors made it seem like a transfer was imminent about a week ago, and that clearly wasn't the case. He said, "My head is here. I have a contract for another year and a half. I know the rumors. There's nothing more than that right now. I'm happy about this win." This was after the Philadelphia game, and that's the most important thing today. And once again, just a reminder, if because the Fire don't have a buyout, if it were to be a free transfer, essentially, there's a good chance that he would have to forfeit the rest of his contract, and he would have to give up what's roughly more than $2 million US in order to make that move. The Fire can't pay him compensation if that were to happen. So yeah.
But that's typical. Just to be clear, like that's typical when a player leaves on a transfer, whether it's free or not. Is the rest of their contract is null and void. No one has like they're not expecting payment. And things just move on.
To that
Right,
end, though,
but
it may also
the phrasing of the Argentine report made it sound like they were trying to get them to mutually terminate his contract,
Right, which the Fire would not be able to do without a buyout.
which the
And
Fire would
like
not
that's
do. Yeah.
and
well,
the other
well,
go ahead.
sorry, because question to that, right? Is that not what we saw with Jairo Torres 6 months ago, where it
That's a
was a
dramatically
mutually
different situation because
okay,
Jairo
yeah, and
Torres, you
it's
needed to get rid of the DP slot, and you also just really needed him to get a fresh start, and it was such a bad situation for him in Chicago. And the transfer window was closing and it was clear nothing was happening and he really needed to leave. So on the day
yeah,
of the
and
Mexican transfer deadline, he agreed to terminate his contract and then a couple days later signed for Juarez.
it's not about the plausibility of the club doing it, it's about the feasibility of it getting done. That was more my question, right? Of like,
No, I
it
mean
could
Gaston
technically
Gaston's playing well right now. I mean,
yeah,
if there's an acceptable offer, I'm sure they'd listen. But it's not like it's someone that is useless to the team. He scored a
Sure.
great goal last week. He's playing quite well right now, and he's in the starting lineup. So,
But
yeah.
it's the mechanics of it, I think that you're asking about as well, John, where like what happened with Hyro was he basically agreed to not get paid a cent more by the Fire so he could make decisions in the future. And Gaston would have to be willing to do something similar for a mutual termination or a free transfer where he immediately signed the deal with a different club. And the question is, would he be willing to do that? Like his salary wouldn't be crazy for Argentina, but realistically, just given the number of minutes that you'd expect a player with his profile right now to be playing, it might be a pay cut. But at the same time, like it's one of those things where you discuss like the length of a deal and stuff like that, and he might be willing to take a pay cut in order to stick around Argentina for more years. Like we really don't know the details of what could be going on.
absolutely, yeah. And to your point, Alex, like he has been in better form and he has the versatility of being bought down. So it's not something that makes sense to do unless he's incredibly unhappy. Um, or I guess, Tim, to what you said, if they've got somebody lined up and he's the only one that can move, that's the crappy part about being one in, one out. Um, Kind of moving on from Gaston to somebody who I think maybe a year ago we would have expected to be leaving on a fee, going somewhere bigger. But Carlos Tehran, bit of a disappointing season between the injury and just general lack of appearances. Not sure we actually have anything really movement wise, but Alex, any information you want to throw out there?
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely do not think he's moving in this window. The injury that he has right now, he's not training on the field. He's not been out there. He's not really been that close to his recovery yet. So I don't have a timeline on that front, but I do not think he's going to be making a move in this summer transfer window. With that being said, something to keep an eye on for the future. He said before January that a move would be possible. He got injured again as well there, but he told me actually a couple of weeks ago that while he's very happy in Chicago right now, he loves everything about living in Chicago, living in the US. He's enjoying his time here. At the same time, his dream is to go to Europe in the future, and that is something he's hoping to do sooner rather than later. So I'd imagine next couple transfer windows in the future, while he's here right now, he's very happy. He's not unhappy at all. His dream is to go to Europe, and he sees that as the next step on his journey. Now, I'm not sure where in Europe that would be, what level that would be, given his inconsistencies with injury, but something to keep an eye on going forward.
Yeah, I think the injury has really been unfortunate for him this year because he really had found his footing again, like a role that let him use his like size and physicality. Basically like man marking opposing star players out of existence, and he did a good job with it when the team switched to three center backs. I wouldn't expect like he just isn't moving this summer with the injury. Like occasionally you'll see injured players move, like that happens like once in a very, very blue moon. Like I don't know, like what's the like something blue, super, something else moon, like throw adjectives in there. Um, which is again like unfortunate for him because like I think the Fire really could get some good value from him. Like he's I think certainly got the profile in some ways of the kind of center back that could get a real significant transfer fee attached, just with a little bit more consistency in terms of health.
Yeah, and I guess kinda to build on that a little bit, and this might be a touch off topic, but I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on generally speaking, it feels like I made a comment before we started of, "We feel a little thin at center back," and Alex, I could, like, tell you're surprised, but it's like, well, Tehran's hurt, Toby's hurt, like, we're starting Wyatt Ohmsberg, which nothing against Wyatt Ohmsberg by any means, but, like, he is not one of the 4 people you'd expect to be starting at center back at this point in the season, right? So I guess we expect Tehran to be somebody who moves on in the future. Do we see this kind of we've got 3 guys feasibly when healthy who could start at center back and kind of moving back and forth between back 2, back 3, or back 4, back 3, excuse me. Do we see any kind of position where maybe he wants to move out in probably not this summer, right, but potentially in the winter because he's concerned about the playing time he could get with Tobias Sahlqvist and Rafael Schihos in the formation as well? Or am I kinda pulling something out of thin air there?
No, I mean, Sahlquist for me is definitely going to be a starter once he's back healthy. He got really, really unlucky with the timing of his injuries because I don't think he's an injury prone player necessarily. He's just had a
Mhm.
couple of unlucky moments this season. Shihos is 34, so he's not going to be here forever. So it is something to keep an eye on if he's going to be a starting level player in the years to come. He's still under contract right now. And then you've got Mauricio Pineda, who's, I guess, a reliable backup, probably not a starter. Arnosu K, who's a right center back, who's good for the three back system right now. And then I think from Fire 2, Diego Conix, who's been the signing from St. Louis, has been someone who's impressed me this season. I don't know if he's a future MLS level player. He's a bit on the older side for an ex pro center back, but something to keep an eye on. Could be potential depth in the future, and he's been on the first team bench a couple of times in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think that you're kind of like raising a good point without raising it, which is like, what are the Fire looking to do this transfer window? Um, we all know this. They're currently 13th in the East. They're a point removed from the last place in the Eastern Conference. There's times that you make like moves to do something this season. I That's not what the Fire need to do this summer. Um, and I don't know if like this is a good point to like shift to like should the goals be for the team this year or like in this window, but
Mhm.
I mean like the Fire aren't really in a place to be competing for trophies this year. I think that like there's still things to fight for, there's still things to compete for, but you're not signing players in this window with the goal of looking at what they're doing between now and October, November, December.
And then before we kind of move on to what we should potentially be looking for, right, in this window, a few last quick guys to mention. Starting with Fede Navarro, kind of again somebody who we thought maybe was going to be something in the future. Obviously, a little bit disappointing in terms of his availability. There has been some rumblings. Alex, if you have a comment or an update on any of that?
Yeah, no, I mean, there was a rumor that Boca Juniors were interested. Now, I don't know who is over there covering Boca Juniors who just really loves creating rumors about Fire players because that's not true. I don't think Federico Navarro is signing for Boca Juniors for 10 million US dollars, as was rumored a couple of weeks ago. That's just not
Agents.
something that's going to happen.
It's not the
But
club.
yeah, so
Just to
yeah,
say
I
that
can
more
I
out loud.
can
Yeah,
just since
it
since that's been out there, I don't think that's something that's gonna be happening, and that seems to me like agent noise on that front, but yeah.
yeah. It
Yeah,
doesn't seem like it's coming from Boca Juniors. Let's put it that way. If they wanted to mine the Chicago Flyers roster, they would have been doing it by now. Like this is just agents like knowing like, hey, like team that has money.
yeah. This is sounds like two Argentinian guys who would like to go back to Argentina. I don't know. Also making that up. And then lastly, a couple of homegrowns who both unfortunately left off the Paris 2024 roster. Chris Brady, Brian Gutierrez. Doesn't seem like there's been a ton of movement. I know I took a pretty strong stance, like first episode of the year, and was like, Chris Brady will not be on the roster end of the season. Like he's gonna get bought out. Somebody's gonna pick him up. Part of that was predicated on I thought he would be playing in Paris. But Alex, any movement on the two homegrowns we could expect to see moving on?
No, I haven't heard anything specific on either front yet. I guess just something to keep an eye on is that Brian Gutierrez's name has been thrown around in Liga MX circles. Uh, I don't think that there's anything remotely concrete, but I wouldn't be shocked if in the future one of the bigger teams, like a wealthy team like a Rayados, like a Tigres, did have him on a list. But there's nothing remotely concrete right now,
I love that
and
you
I
didn't
don't
say
think
that.
anything is going to be happening. I don't think anything's going to be happening this window with him at
I
all.
don't think it's gonna be happening this window either. I love that you didn't say the team that is the obvious one, which is Chivas, because of the bind they've put themselves in where they're like, oh, you're FMF, like you're L tree eligible. Well, we'll pay you like $5 million for this guy that has started 25 MLS games because we are just desperate for like somewhat talented bodies at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it would be one of the wealthier teams in the north. If there was anything, there was a Cruz Azul rumor, but that was completely false.
Yeah, and to that end, like he is now Shaqiri is seemingly on the outs. He's starting every game. He's playing 90 minutes. Seems like makes less sense to make a move like that now as opposed to maybe a year's end or something to that end.
Yeah, if the Fire were willing to do it, I think it'd be a statement about like we don't want to be the kind of team that stays in somebody's way. And like that, I think is a powerful statement to be making. I mean, a little bit less powerful in a season when it doesn't really look like you're going to be competing for trophies or anything like that. But like, still, I think that's like a good statement to make of like, look, we'll develop you. But we want you to succeed on your own terms. I just don't think it's imminent.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well said. Perfect. Wonderful. So kind of moving on to uh, there aren't a ton of solid incoming rumors to this point, but we can talk for sure about what we need because I don't think anybody watching this team notices a lack of talent. So we've got a few different position points to talk about. The first, kind of starting in central midfield. We just spoke about potentially moving on from Shaqiri, Gaston Giménez, Federico Navarro, three players who have seen a lot of minutes through the midfield. Um, Currently, it feels like we're looking for a partner for Kellen Acosta centrally. Alex, who do you see as a potential target for the team to be chasing in this window?
No, I think definitely a name to keep an eye on going forward, especially in this window, is Mathieu Choinier from
Oh,
CF
fantastic,
Montreal.
fantastic shout out. Yeah.
The
Pronunciation.
reason I wanted to mention him in particular is because not only do the Fire have done a lot of business with Montreal the last couple of years, Georgi Mihailovic, Kai Kamara, Chinonzo Four, more than any other team, I think the Fire have done business with Montreal. He's asked for a trade, and that means he may be available for cheaper than he normally would. He's a Canadian international, an MLS All Star. This is one of the best players in his position in the league. He can play in the middle. He can play as a wingback, and I think he'd be a great addition to this team. He can play as a left wing back. He can play next to Kellen. He can be in kind of a variety of roles. There's nothing obviously concrete on this front. It's just a name I would keep an eye on if you're looking at this transfer window because he's probably going to be leaving Montreal in the near future. He did ask for a trade, and Montreal are not the most ambitious or free spending team in the league either. So if he wants to stay in North America but wants to take a step forward within that environment, I don't think Montreal is going to be the place for him to do that.
The only concern there, of course, being that when was the last time the Fire got reasonable value in an MLS transaction? I
No, I
I
Well,
mean
can't think of
when I
it.
look at Montreal though, I look at last season where they traded MLS All-Star and one of the best center backs in the league, Kamal Miller, plus over $1 million of general allocation money in exchange for two rotational players, Bryce Duke and Ari Lassiter. And that was one of the most bizarre trades I've ever seen in my life. And I still don't quite know how that happened and how Miami got that value out of it. But I don't know. You never know what could happen when a player is unhappy and they make it clear they want to be traded.
Well,
and it seems like there's a lot of people that are unhappy in Montreal right now, and like that's part of it. The other thing that we're saying, like as you kind of hinted to, the Fire since Georg Heitz has been in charge of the team have not really made a lot of intra-league trades, but like one team because it's the same as any other job where like you network, you get to know people. There's people you deal with. There's people that like maybe you know who they are, but you don't. Clearly, there's connections between the front office now and Montreal's
And
front
there have
office,
been
even though they're
shakeups in Montreal's front office. I
a
do want to
lot,
make that
a,
clear. It's a lot of
a
different
lot.
yeah.
people than it was last year, but
But
still.
some of the people below sort of like the top level figures who are definitely significant are still there, including ownership. My understanding is that Joey Saputo has been fairly involved with most moves that are made in and out. Um, so that is a realistic Chicago Fire trade partner inside MLS, I think more than most others.
Mhm.
And in terms of like there actually being like decent value for it, like on one hand, like the Fire certainly have like kind of like potentially overpaid for players like Kai Kamara, and the other side is they did also get some real value for trading players on. Like I think that they kind of got overpaid for Chinonso 04 based on what his value was for Gam. I mean, how has he had a minute for like he's had a like 5
He
appearances
was
for
their top
Montreal.
goal
Like
scorer last season, if I'm not mistaken, with
uh
like five.
and he's been on loan. Like it, you know what I mean? Like the Fire have managed to get some good value out of Montreal trades. So that's not a crazy shout out whatsoever.
Yeah, and two quick things I want to say. One, it looks like he is signed through 2025, correct? Through winter of 2025, only making, according to Spot Rec, because I pulled it up really quick, around $300,000 a year, and that's with the club option. So not unaffordable, but likely somebody you would want to give a new deal to if you're spending capital to bring him in. And then Tim, we'll kind of throw it to you. You can keep on talking. Tell us a little bit about who your thoughts on the central mid, or who you would look to bring in central midfield reinforcement.
So like one name in the league, because I think that like looking in the league is something the Fire haven't done enough of really. And you can find value there. You can assume a player's contract for what it is right now and like decide whether or not you want to resign them. Eric Williamson isn't happy in Portland. Under Phil Neville, he really hasn't been getting the number of minutes that he's gotten. He's a DC United Academy product. They basically held a king's ransom while refusing to sign him just to get him to go somewhere else. Eventually, uh, the Timbers paid that king's ransom. He's had a few productive years there, but it looks like his time there is more or less coming to an end. He's one of the better defensive midfielders in the league. Like I don't think you could really make an argument against that. Although it seems like whenever I take a position on a player inside MLS, Alex takes the opposite position for it. Um, but if he's looking to move on, and it looks like he really is, like he would be an ideal, I think, Fire target. Like he would make the Fire instantly better in the defensive midfield. Kellen Acosta, I think, gives you a lot of what you need in the D mid, but I think they need is a partner that is like close to his level. I think that Eric Williamson gives you that, especially within MLS. Um, he would be a fairly decent value like almost a bargain really when you look at his salary of like I think it's like close to like the max
Mhm.
salary budget charge like 600-700K.
Yeah.
He's at
So it doesn't.
675 right now.
Oh, all right. So I was right. Yeah, so like that is
And
I more or less bang on to the max salary budget charge, which means the team wouldn't really need to use allocation money to buy his salary down as they need to do with Acosta, or a
Mhm.
lot of other players in the roster. So
I do wanna input there, Tim,
And
just as we're talking about sorry, contract. Signed again, only signed through 25, right? So it is somebody who, if you
mhm.
want him to have a long-term impact, if you're investing capital, there may be some kind of extension there.
well, and
Go
that's the
ahead,
thing
Alex.
about intra MLS moves is like you're not investing capital, right? Like you're spending allocation money potentially sending it the way of the other team, but I don't even think you're really necessarily sending that much because they also know what the player's value is. Like a lot of the time, if you're willing to offer something like a sell on percent on the off chance that they move to Europe, which at 27, I think Williamson's not that likely to move on at this point. Um, they're willing to play ball.
Yeah, and I think another reason that Williamson is interesting to me is because if you're looking for a partner for Kellen Acosta, well, Kellen Acosta and Eric Williamson did start a Gold Cup final together. They are familiar with each other. They've played together in two different national team camps. I believe they started alongside each other 3 times, which is not nothing considering they were training together, living together for a grand total of about 5, 6 weeks between those two camps. So they're two people who are familiar with each other, I'm sure. It's not like they were in the national team for 10 years together, but at the same time, it's good to have somebody who's familiar. Whereas if you're bringing somebody completely from the outside, not only is there an adjustment period to MLS, to Chicago, but to his teammates. Whereas Eric Williamson knows the league, same as Charnier, knows the league. Their adjustment will be quicker, especially on the field, and their teammates will be more familiar with their game as well. So it should make the adjustment a bit smoother, it being mid-season right now.
The other thing about that is a big challenge. Like there's like the David Goss theorem, right? Like a lot of players that come to the league don't do well their first year, but start doing better their second year. Eric Williamson has played in MLS his like whole career, so like that adjustment period wouldn't really be there.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there was a lot of talk around the winter window of Georg Heitz needing to find players who can play in MLS, right? And whether that's a profile or whether that's purely by scouting the league, it's an area he needed to improve in. Um, so far this year, Hugo Kuiper's performing well. That was nice. But an easy way to do that is to find a guy who has spent his entire career in MLS. Um, Wonderful. So, kind of moving from the central midfield, because I'm not going to mention the random French defensive midfielder that I scoped out because it's not realistic. He plays in the Eredivisie. Anyway, moving off of the midfield and onto the wing, we've seen a good amount of turnover, kind of moving from the 4-2-3-1, playing into more of a wingback formation that could look a lot more feasible when it is not Jonathan Dean and it is Andrew Gutman playing where he's supposed to be. But there's been a lot of talk about bringing in a winger, whether it's somebody younger, somebody in a more designated player role. Alex, any thoughts, any targets, any ideas that you'd like to see there?
Yeah, I don't have specific names at the moment. I don't really have any suggestions because I think that the Fire are playing without wingers right now because they really only have one starting quality winger, and that's Marin Haile Selassie. And other guys like Chris Mueller throwing Brian Gutierrez out of position. They weren't really helping the team, which is why you've seen the team play without wingers in this 5-3-2 formation. I do think that if you are looking at a DP target in the near future, whether it be this window, whether it be in January, winger is
Jack
probably
Grealish.
going to be the top position. Whoa.
I'm kidding. No, I'm completely kidding about that.
No.
Sorry, I
What?
intentionally meant to throw you, Alex. My bad.
Whenever people do that, it completely throws me off. But
Sorry,
I
I won't do
think
that
I
again. I'm
think
sorry.
that I think that the DP winger is probably going to be in terms of if they're looking to spend some money, if they're looking to sign a bigger name, that's probably the position it would be, simply because that position is so thin, so much so that the team has played much better since they completely moved away from playing any wingers at all.
and it would instantly make the Fire better, right? Like that's like they don't really have a lot of wide attacking threats, and it's one of those things where there's players that require like a significant adjustment period, and like potentially like they're like that's a position where that could be happening. But if you significantly up the talent, just the talent upgrade, just having other teams need to defend against an attacking threat that is wide alongside like Hugo Kuipers, alongside Marin Highlights Selassie, instantly makes the team better and more dangerous. Um, Almost regardless of like the name or player profile, right? Like as long as other teams thought it was a guy that was dangerous and needed to be defended, um, it just creates more space for the other players around them, which is sort of what you want to do. Because I think that what we saw like last week was a perfect example against the Earthquakes, where the team just had a really difficult time trying to unsettle San Jose's defense. Like they just always seemed set and ready for whatever the Fire were bringing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and kind of to that point of, I guess there from where I'm sitting, there does feel to be a little bit of a question, right? Of as we talk about another designated player, obviously we kind of expect there to be a slot open. I think there's a feeling that Shaqiri will move on if everybody has what they want, as they better something than nothing, I guess. Um, is there a chance that we don't see a big DP move on the wing or anywhere else, and things tend to kind of hold pat a little bit? Or do we see this summer as an opportunity for we're going to make a move and try to get this push, get Frank Klopas into the playoffs and keep him in his position? Or is it more of we are underperforming, we need to make a change? We're not going to see that big move. We're not going to invest any more than we already have, which frankly is already a lot with some of the additions we saw this winter.
Yeah, so for, like the Fire are one of the highest spending teams in the league, and obviously the results haven't really followed the way that anyone would have hoped. I think that any move you make this season is the cherry on top, but I think you make moves whether like you make moves to make the team better for every match they play in. And the playoffs in MLS are never really outside of the question. Like we saw, like Sporting Kansas City's, like they became like the archetypical example. They didn't win a game in their first 10 or something like that. They ended up doing a late charge. They made the playoffs. They won the play-in match. Like they overperformed in the second half of the season. Um, but I think that really what you need to start doing, it just seems like ever since 2020, when a lot of the Fire's roster was dismissed and then basically replaced in the course of 2-3 months, between December 2019 when Georg Heitz was hired and March when the team started playing, it seems like the team has been in the back foot where they're more reactive with transfers. I think they need to start doing what they did really with Hugo Kuipers, which is this is the guy that we want. Like there's a outside potential. It's like a 5% chance, right? But like outside potential that Hugo Kuipers is still playing in Chicago in 8 years or something like that, right? Um, so like he is the striker the team believes they need for an extended period of time. And I think that the team needs to start making moves like that rather than, oh well, we need an X and this guy's available right now. Um, it needs to be more long-term planning than that, especially because as it stands, like the team, like 13th place, 1 point out of last, right? Anything you do this season is gravy on top. I think you need to pick the players that you think are best long term and not just for this season.
Yeah, and I think definitely something to keep an eye on in terms of the DP slots is that ever since Heights took over as sporting director ahead of the 2020 season, all three DP slots have been filled pretty much all the way through. There was this brief window at the start of last season before Doumbia came where there was one open DP slot, but other than that, all three have been filled pretty much all the way through. Right now, that's Shaqiri, Gaston, and Kuipers. I think there's a good chance if you see, say, Shaqiri leave in the summer, I think history would suggest that they would be looking to bring somebody in to fill that slot as well and not leave it open.
Yeah, the one thing I will say about that though is haste makes waste, and I think that's been like the easy complaint. Um Shakiri's leaving one way or another at the end of the year. I think the big thing is the summer transfer window is when the biggest names are available. It's when the most players are available because it's the off season in Europe. And the Fire have really not made many moves whatsoever in the window. Like I think they've had two incoming transfers in the summer window one season. I don't think they've had more than one in others since Georg Heitz became in charge of the team. Really, Garth Lagerwey, the Atlanta United president, typically signs more players in the summer window, even at the expense of like the team getting results go against them earlier in the year, because this is when you get the good players and you're building for seasons to come and not for the current season. Um, and really, that's what I'm looking for from the Fire is just for them to start making those long term decisions that are the right player and not the player that's right now available. And so we'll see. Like to me, that's going to be the big test. I think that Heights had a really good season, like off season transfer window. I think they did a good job bringing players in, like signing Acosta. He was one of the top free agents available. Um, Rebuilding the back line, and I thought was a good job. But I just want to see the team to start making intelligent signings that are big moves in the summer. Because if you're bringing players in from Europe or South America, like this is when you do it.
And I guess kind of to that end, Tim, like, is there a name that you're looking at the board of, I guess whether it's a winger or if it is somewhere else, right? That you would say like this is a guy we should invest in now, in the hopes that maybe not this year, but next year, 2026, he's somebody who can make a huge impact on a team that's trying to get better.
Well, I hate to quote Georg Heitz with this, but um, something that he said when he was first interviewed when he became the sporting director of the Fire was looking in profiles, not names. And I think that sometimes this front office has signed surprising names. Um, I honestly wasn't thinking Hugo Kuipers would be a good Fire designated, DP number 9 target. I think that he's come in and done a really good job. I think that he's had a fuller match profile than what we would have expected given the scouting report on him coming in. Um, so I don't think it really is about names, but I think it is about signing players that you believe in that are available for the long term. That like are going to make you better for a long time, and that's the real challenge here. And we talked about like the positions that I think are significant. Like it's that spine, like a 6, an 8, a 10, and a winger. I think like that's where the team needs to be looking.
Absolutely, can't disagree with you there. Um, and that I think will kind of take us to the end here. Selfishly, I think me being who I am, if you've ever listened to Hot Takes, I'm not going to get through a whole episode without saying we should have signed Ilias Chair in this window, but there's a whole arrest thing to deal with. Whatever.
Well,
He
the
beat the
window's not
case.
open
That's all
yet.
I'm going to say.
The window's not
Yeah,
open yet. So
I know. I know. No, but unless either of you has anything more to add, that is as good a place as any to kind of wrap up and keep things moving on. Alex, Tim, anything you want to toss in?
No, I mean that's pretty much all. If there's updates, I will share them with everybody on social media. I will not hesitate. And I'll be scouting in Europe for new young designated player.
There we go. Our very own going to be out prowling looking for new players for the club. So again, as you said, please stay tuned. Men97.com. You'll always be able to find all the updates there. Alex, you want to tell us where to find you on socials?
Yes. Twitter is sorry. X is AM Calabrese 12. And that's the main one. So follow me there.
On there, Tim, you want to let the folks know where they can keep up with you?
yeah, on X, I'm sing underscore electric. That's probably the easiest place to follow me as well. We should maybe think about whether or not that's where we really want to be hanging out in the future, but that's a long term discussion.
Yeah, well, to my point before, right? Everything is on the website. You can find all the articles and updates there. Probably the best place to read about all things Chicago Fire. Um, Thank you all so much again for joining us. It was a wonderful time talking all the updates on transfer news in this summer window for Chicago Fire. Stay tuned for new episodes of the Bonfires, new episodes of Hot Takes as things move along, and stay tuned to the site and to everybody's Twitter for all the good updates. Thanks so much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.